Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Q&A session of Building America's Finest UX Community. My name is Brittany Schissel, and I'm the Head of Experience at San Diego Experience Design, also referred to as SDXD, and I'll be moderating the session today. For anybody who's unfamiliar with what SDXD does, I'll give a little bit of background really quick. So SDXD is a community of around 3,300 members. And what we aim to do is bring events to our community that inspire. And the goal is really to provide you with at least one thing that you can start using in your professional work the following day. So what I'd like to, just a ground rule really quick, we're going to be doing live Q&A. Thank you for anybody who has submitted questions previously. We'll also be addressing those questions. If you'd like to submit a question, please feel free to use the Q&A feature within Zoom. So you should see Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and just type your question right in. And without further ado, let me introduce our panelists for today. We have Paul Hong, who is the founding president of SDXD, Tara Jensen, who's the previous president, and then James Vinn, the current president of SDXD. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start off by asking the first question here. Let me stop sharing. All right, so hopefully you can see everybody. One click. Okay. So the first question that we want to start off with is, when there's passionate and creative people that come together, there's bound to be a lot of ideas and positive energy. So how do you guide and take these high-level ideas into actionable goals? Tara, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Especially in a group of designers, everybody's got a lot of great ideas for events, and you always want to try to incorporate as many ideas as you can. So starting earlier with planning, as we talked a little bit about in the recording, really helps you to have the time to kind of like go broad, and we definitely would go very broad in order to collect a bunch of ideas. And just kind of like when you have event ideas, like figuring out where are some good places to have those brainstorms where people can all kind of contribute, and then you kind of get to a point where if you get whose idea was what idea, and it just kind of like morphs together into something. We've definitely had events where different people had like something very different in their mind in terms of what that event was going to be, and that could be very challenging. I think really just like, we would do things like go around like, okay, let's have a clarity meeting. What do you think the event is? What do you think the event is? And just having everybody kind of describe like what they think is going on, and then kind of talking through like, okay, of all of these different things that we have here, what value will the audience get from that, or the attendees get from that? And what is the higher value of these? What is the higher effort? And do we have the time for that? So like, you just kind of start talking about trade-offs, I think, at that point, but ultimately incorporating as much as you can from like the collective group. It's rare when an event is really like one person's idea in, as a whole,
Yeah. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, sure. Like Tara said, right, especially in this kind of community, you're going to have people who are very creative, who have really great ideas. I think maybe something to add on is, ideally everybody, and this is actually a really good opportunity to kind of learn this, right, is you'd be able to do both sides of this, which is have big ideas, but then also make it real. And so, often what we ended up doing actually is kind of pairing those two sort of viewpoints. So if you had somebody who really nails like logistics and stuff, and you pair them with somebody who has a fantastic idea, that really works really well, because the logistics person is going to poke and prod and say, okay, how do you see this happening? Like, well, that's going to cost $12,000. We're not going to be able to do that. And so how can we pare that down, but still, get your vision out there? So that's the one thing that I would add, is that you got to balance both.
Yeah, ultimately, just one more little add-on. I see it as like very much like any design project, especially like, you know, as I'm working at ServiceNow in a much more collaborative, like many designers kind of situation. You know, show your idea to one group of people, you get some feedback from them, and you're like, oh, that's something I wouldn't have thought of, and throw it to another group, and you just like you're kind of just adding to it and adjusting it and making it better overall. So having a lot of creative people, I think, is a great thing. It, you know, can make it difficult getting to that final, you know, what's that final outcome, but ultimately makes the events much better.
Got it. Great. Well, we do have one question. Did SDXD ever formally register as an LLC or a nonprofit? Paul, you've had the longest haul here.
Yeah.
You want to start us off with that?
So we didn't seriously look into it during my tenure, but we did sort of run into it. It became an issue because part of the thing to think about is, you know, when you're first starting and it's pretty grassroots and pretty guerrilla, for lack of a better term, you know, you get sponsorship. A lot of sponsorship is in kind, and you're just thinking about one or two events down the line. As the organization grew, and especially into Tara's time, you know, it became more and more important that there were like fiscal responsibilities, and the scale of some of the financial dealings were such that that was a serious consideration. And so maybe I can hand it off to Tara and James to kind of speak a little more into that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know you guys were thinking about it a little bit, I think, before I became president. And then when I became president, we talked about potentially becoming a nonprofit. And we also considered fiscal sponsorship with a specific group in the area that was interested and sounded like they were willing to give us quite a bit of freedom. But we were a little concerned about, like, you know, if we do the fiscal sponsorship route, are there ever situations where like we're not going to have control over something we might want to have control over? So James and I actually met with a lawyer that was on the board for that other group to kind of talk about what goes into sponsorship and kind of a Q&A of like, you know, what size is our group? What kind of considerations do you have given all those things? What would your timeline look like? What are the things you should do before you even kick off that timeline? All those things. So we actually, during my time on the in the president role of the board, kind of got together and wrote through bylaws and all that kind of stuff, and went through this. Like, we've kind of got everything we need to kick off the nonprofit timeline, but during my presidency, we didn't officially kick that off, which kind of leads us into where James would jump in here, right?
Everything is indeed ready to go. And as we've discussed, there are some considerations both ways. So you do have to pay some fees to have them submitted. You do have to do some bookkeeping. So for us, it's a matter of discussing and then determining when's the right moment. So I'll just be vague here and say, stay tuned. And thanks so much for that question.
If I can just tack on a couple of things right there for the audience, because I think it's kind of important, and it may not be clear. Fiscal sponsorship is this interesting sort of middle ground where you're not necessarily, your organization is the nonprofit itself. What you do is you partner in legally binding terms with a nonprofit organization, and they are the ones who are stewards of any funds. They for a certain percentage of like operating costs, they are the stewards of your funds. Any donations, any contributions are to them. And then they're the ones that will then release those funds to your organization. So it's a easier way to do it, but there's a certain cost to it, an ongoing cost. The other thing that I'll mention is, this is when you have this question, if you're organizing a group, if you have this question, that's a great problem to have. That means you're at a certain scale where these considerations come into play. And there's another thing that's very important, which is some of your sponsors, especially bigger corporate entities, they cannot donate unless it's a nonprofit, right? Like, that's just, their hands are tied. It's for tax reasons, it's for other reasons, also just corporate governance. And so being able to say that you're a nonprofit, or at least under fiscal sponsorship with a nonprofit, really makes it possible for them to work with you.
Great, thanks for all those nuggets of insights about LLCs and nonprofits. The next question that I want to ask is from someone from Ohio, Keith. So he's asking, are you part of a national or global group, or are you local to San Diego only? And in your opinion, what's the pros and cons for each of those things? James, did you want to start us off with that?
Sure. So to directly answer the question, we are not. We're totally independent. And we've stayed that way because we've been able to accomplish this growth and invite all these speakers and build up this amazing community without the need for a national presence. So I actually haven't explored those conversations too much. I know Paul had some early conversations with more national orgs, and I'd love to hear your experience and thought process.
Yeah, so we did consider it. And it was actually the national organization reached out to us because we had a certain scale. And we looked into it, and it just at the time wasn't the right fit for us. And, you know, this sounds like I'm going to toot our own horns, so to speak, a little bit, but we're already sort of figuring out on our own, and by studying other groups and so forth, we're already on a good trajectory. And when we were talking to this national organization, there wasn't anything that they could really add. They were more geared toward founding a new chapter. And so a lot of their playbooks and toolkits and that kind of stuff and mentorship would have been around there. And we were already in full flight. And so when we spoke to them, the key was for us is to be a local chapter of a national or international organization was, what is that? What is the two-way street kind of thing there, right? Obviously they get a local chapter, they get local membership, and in exchange for that, for lack of a better term, we would hopefully get access to like a national or international network of speakers, right? World-class speakers, mentorship from other community leaders that have built up broad things, done like huge, maybe national, international conferences, that kind of stuff. And that's what we're looking for. And at the time, this organization wasn't necessarily set up to provide that for us. And so we decided to, do our own thing, be a local, 100% local organization.
Yeah, so it sounds like you really want to take a look at what are the pros and cons of that, and what benefits do they offer, and conversely, what can we offer them? And if there's a fit there, then pursue it. But if not, do not.
I mean, I'll mention this. There's another group. People who are in San Diego probably know a group called UX Speakeasy, and they're the local chapter of IXDA, which is, this renowned organization, very strong. And they have a great relationship, at least from the outside looking in. I'm not an organizer there, but I can see how that relationship really benefits both parties. And so like they get access to like when they do interactions, like they do interactions redux, these local sort of resharing of content from the International Interactions Annual Interactions Conference. They get a lot of support, and they get access to speakers from that conference, so that they can have local mini conferences after. And that's a great symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So next question is from Jess, and Jess wants to know, how do you see UX changing to meet the demands of the new world? I'm sure that there's a lot that can be unpacked in that.
I think, obviously a lot of things, like we always kind of look to like, what are the technology changes? What are the different ways we need to think about things? In a lot of our events, we try to circle around that, a lot of things are going down this automation, AI kind of a thing, but yet a lot of the same principles still apply, like ethics apply at all these different places. So I think we do some events where we kind of look back in order to look forward. How does this apply to these new things? Paul, I remember when you were president, we did these mashup events where it was take unlike things and try to mash them together and see how that kind of helps you think about these things that maybe you haven't thought of before. Doesn't really go into necessarily how I'm thinking about it changing, but at least preparing and making sure people have the tools to be prepared for that. We also did a lot of like facilitator events. I think it was Paul that told me like the UX role is turning into like, you need to be a good facilitator, not so much a great designer sometimes. Like really build up those facilitator skills. So those are the themes I'm I guess seeing. Turn it over to Paul or James, whoever wants to step in next.
I'll wade into this, and I think maybe from a different angle. This is such a broad question. Hopefully, we'll cover it between the three of us. I mean, I think maybe more in terms of just the role of UX in general and our place in the world, right? And you know, not to over rotate too much into this, but I feel like more and more, because UX is about end experiences and keeping, you know, the human in every technical equation in mind. More and more, we're going to be asked with things like, are your products and your experiences inclusive, right? Do they reflect, you know, overarching social issues right now? Because there's no longer sort of this like clear firewall between what's business, what's politics, what's society, what's climate, what's, you know, economy, all that kind of stuff. And so I think in our work, we need to consider a lot of those things. You know, we end up also being the voice of ethical concerns. And we're going to have to build that into our processes and into our designs.
And I'll just touch on empathy. So I specialize in UX research, and as you know, it's very challenging to go into someone's home right now to do contextual inquiry or even sign up for a lab. So we have all this new technology like Zoom, Hangouts, Skype, and I feel like there's just a need to take an extra moment of pause so that we can understand what the folks on the other end of the screen are going through. And as Tara alluded to, a lot of the mission and the goals of UX have stayed the same. So we're still trying to create incredible experiences. And like Paul mentioned, there's these new considerations of inclusivity and ethics. So just melding everything that's going on in the world right now.
Great. So the next question that I want to ask, also from Keith, is what's one of the proudest or maybe funniest memories that you've had as an SDXD organizer? I'm sure that many come to mind, so maybe I'll just give you a moment. Funniest or maybe one of your most proud moments. James, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I would say this memory kind of combines both. It was last fall, about a year ago from now, we took a group of 30 folks down to Tijuana and Valle de Guadalupe, the wine country in Baja. And we rented this little mini mansion with 10 bedrooms, and we just had a wonderful retreat and weekend. So it was such a proud, fun moment to see that our community could grow to where we could do something like that and kind of evolve to the point where we're connecting and spending time together beyond just for an hour in a room to listen to a talk and truly get to know each other.
This is a tough one, I think, but proudest moment possibly, or I guess, let's see, let's go with, I don't know, I've had a couple. We've had a couple events that we really added like some crazy logistic challenges, and I knew going into it that it was going to be very, very difficult. I think like the Interview Olympics event that we did, it was like, you know, we had to have 3 different groups kind of moving around, and we had a hiring manager paired up with a, you know, an attendee. It had to be a 1-to-1. We really made it challenging. Knowing that, you know, you're going to get a different amount of attendees than maybe you had on the RSVP list. What happens if you get fewer? What happens if you get more? So we had to do like a lot of like mental juggling, like right at the start of the event in order to make the event get started. And just like the fact that that ended somewhat on time and went as smoothly as it did, like that, I remember being like just this huge relief, because I think ultimately that was the most challenging like day of event of my entire presidency. But also like proudest moment, I think, you know, when James came onto the board, he wanted to do a lot of the emceeing for events and was taking on a lot of things. We had a lot of board members who did a lot of heavy lifting. And I think there was a point where like you had presented the event topic and I got to kind of sit back and watch the event happen. And that was where I'm like starting to realize like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to start like backing off and eventually, you know, release that role. So just seeing that you're working yourself out of your job and realizing that, I think was pretty powerful.
Dang it, Tara, you stole my answer.
Ah.
That was exactly it. You know, seeing the longevity and seeing it grow and seeing the new leaders step in and knowing that like it's just going to get even better. It's an amazingly proud moment. I'll share a funny moment at Tara's expense. And there's a picture of it in our talk. So we're giving a talk in a fairly large room, right? And it's like right at the beginning, and it's a key moment of somebody's like introducing something, and there's the loudest crash. Sounds like a wall caved in. Everybody turns around, and it was Tara, who was kind of trying to stand in the back and like just take care of stuff. She had sat down on a bunch of these stacks of like these cushion mats, and completely fell over. And then just kind of sat, held her phone, like waving at everybody, going, "Don't mind me, everything's cool." So that was a funny moment.
And I'm sure there's many more if we gave you some more time to think.
Right.
Next is a question from Andrew. What are some of the key differences between SDXD and UX Speakeasy besides that UX Speakeasy has the connection to IXDA?
I'll take a first stab at it, and that's a big question, right? And it's something actually that is, there's not a set answer because it's one of these things that's a very organic kind of interplay. They do really great stuff, right? And their initial mission, as far as, you know, as good, because I'm a member and I would show up to their events as well. You know, they are very much about like providing a social space for UX professionals to get together, right? So even down to their branding about speakeasy and just getting together, it's easy. We're just having a good time, but it's with people who work in the industry, think about the same kind of things, and it's a very social kind of interaction. For us, what SDXD was about was same kind of thing, right? Social, but oh, and I should say this too, is that speakeasy, you know, they would have maybe some set topics. At least in the old days, they would have some set topics, maybe have, you know, a couple of people do like 5-minute lightning talk, right? And so we used to say like, hey, that lightning talk was amazing. I could listen to that person for like 45 minutes. I wish I could pick their brain. And so, you know, what we liked to do in SDXD was kind of bridge that need, right? Which was longer form, you know, set presentations, workshops, collaboration, facilitation techniques, that kind of stuff. And so I think that's the main difference, is that Speakeasy tends to be much more about creating that incredible, vibrant social space to get people to make connections. SDXD wants, you know, we always want that level of connection, but we also are a little more structured in terms of, you know, presentations, longer form presentations, workshops, those types of things.
Yeah, I think Paul hits that pretty heavily, pretty accurately. Yeah, very, very much like more of a social versus like a really heavy focus on education. It's not that we don't both do similar things. It's not that they don't do good workshops. We also do, you know, we also have beer at our events and stuff. So like, there's definitely like overlaps between it, but I think that's the primary difference, is like, we're going to be focused a little bit more heavily on that thing that you can take home with you the next day and making sure we nail that. Whereas they're going to be a little bit more heavily focused on that community aspect. We do also like talk very closely with each other, at least, and always have, about like, you know, they're that first Wednesday, we're that second or third Wednesday. So like having an event every other week for me, as like somebody who, before I was even on the board for SDXD, was awesome, that I could go to a UX focused event twice a month, guaranteed. And if they changed their schedule, we always tried to talk to each other to make sure we weren't overlapping.
Great, thanks. So the next question is about partnerships. And I know that James has been doing a lot of work on partnerships lately. So I'd love to hear your perspective first, James, but what's the right mix of partnerships? So for example, if you co-hosted every single event with the other groups in San Diego, then why have the other groups? How often do you do repeat partnering with one group versus purposefully partnering with a new group? I know that we've partnered heavily with other groups in San Diego, but have also started to reach out beyond San Diego and even California. So what are your thoughts on the right mix of partnerships, James?
That's a great question. And I think to dovetail off the previous discussion, it's really great when you can find unique value in partnering two groups together where you create something that otherwise wouldn't happen. So one of the strongest partnerships is with a group called the Denver UX Newbies. And they focus on early career professionals, students, recent graduates, folks who are transitioning. So we really love partnering with them because it offers an avenue of programming that we might not otherwise focus all of our energy on. That said, I really like at least once a month that we're doing a flagship premiere event, that it's just us, we control the direction and the vision, everything like that. Paul mentioned it in our video. It can be really great when you want to build membership and engage unique audiences and create unique topics. So you can think even beyond UX interaction design and UX research. So I would say it's great to have a mix of partnerships when you can do something on your own and then also reach out and fill new gaps.
Awesome. So I see that Kara, you want to take a stab. This goes back to, again, kind of some of the partnership aspects, but you want to answer, in our intro, we talk about a lack of a strong sense of community. Can you speak to that? Do you think that it was because other existing organizations were already present, or that didn't address the needs of members or community, or is it something else?
Yeah, and I think that comes from a comment Paul made, and part of the reason why I wanted to answer was because I was one of the people he was talking about. He was talking about how there were a lot of like solo UX designers, team of one, kind of, you know, that didn't have some of the support that they needed. And before I found SDXD and UX Speakeasy, I was going to both when I first found the UX groups in the area. I was attending things like AIGA. I don't think I had found out about SEGD until the first SDXD partnership with them. So having all these different groups with these different focus actually, and the partnerships can really help you discover all these different areas. But going to AIGA was kind of more like in alignment with that graphic design role that I had before I transitioned into UX, and discovering UX. I was like, this is something I never had heard of before. And I went to school in Wisconsin. It wasn't very big in Wisconsin. I think it's still not necessarily like the biggest industry in Wisconsin. So it was like an avenue that I wasn't aware of. And then having these groups very focused on that helps me push for more UX practices within my organization, and helps me like educate the next place I worked on what this was, why it's important, why it's not just graphic design. So I think it was very much like a need for having the community that supported more specific needs, sort of. Paul, I think you probably are dying to answer this also, since I know that was something you brought up, but over to you.
I think you like nailed it, hit the nail right on the head, which was that team of one kind of thing. And then also, you know, the thing that I would add on is exactly what you're talking about as your personal experience. I think in general, as an industry, like our organization kind of grew and attract a lot of people from, you know, adjacent spaces, because they're actually being pushed into those spaces, at least becoming aware of it, right? You might be a traditional graphic designer, but all of a sudden UX jobs are everywhere. All of a sudden everyone's like, hey, do you know how to do, you know, information architecture, right? Like, you're a UX designer, aren't you? Or you need to be. And so I think it just was sort of concurrent with that sort of general trend, at least in San Diego, that you know, a lot more people in these sort of like very traditionally very focused fields were being sort of brought, whether willingly or not, under the umbrella of UX. And so, you know, it just felt like a need there, which is, you know, all these people, everybody is welcome. You're all talking about it. And so, you know, this group is a forum for learning more and sharing more about that.
And then I think there's also that aspect of like tribe. Like, I think UX designers tend to think about, especially with research and everything, like tend to think about things in a particular way. And I think AIGA, you know, you get a lot of those people also, but like you kind of really get that sense of tribe with people who are doing very similar things So I personally just felt that more within the UX orgs, which doesn't mean anything, negative about any of the other groups. It's just, everybody has their different areas of focus. And I don't know, there's just so much more to connect on when you're dealing with a lot of the same things. So I think that's just another aspect.
Yeah, along that line, Sunny's asking how to bridge the gap between UX and HCI communities and access to resources, methods, and technologies on a global scale. I know that we started off, at least a precursor to SDXD was more along those lines of HCI. And I'm curious if, Paul, maybe you want to take that one and talk about that.
Yeah, I would, without putting too fine a point on it, I would actually challenge that underlying premise about there's a distinction between UX and HCI. I mean, I know, technically there is. I mean, my background is in HCI, right? I study cognitive science. I don't come from a necessarily like a traditionally creative background. So for me, it's a natural fit, right? I use HCI thinking and techniques in UX work and always have. So bridging those communities is really interesting. I mean, and this might be a little controversial, but I'll just put this out there because it's always fun to have a little bit of controversy. I actually think that bridge, that gap is a kind of a one-way moat, if you will. And it is that the HCI community tends to be very academic. They have academic conferences, they publish academic papers, they have a high level of rigor, right? Like peer review rigor and so forth. That UX practitioners, we want to be rigorous, right? We want to take the best thinking and the cutting edge thinking and research and apply that to our work. But I think there's a difference in sort of the standards of that kind of rigor that make it sometimes a little hard to bridge that gap, and so if anything, I would say the HCI community be a little more practitioner oriented. And the UX community, the practitioner community, be inspired by the level of rigor and thinking that the HCI community provides. So that's my answer.
One thing I would also throw in, which is something I picked up from UX Speakeasy event, actually, they did an event where they had, I think it was a researcher talking about game design. And she had to talk about, going from like something very, very academic into this space where you had to like be really scrappy. So if you can find people who have actually made those transitions and let them do a talk about that specifically, I think that can help your community learn how to bridge those gaps, especially from someone who's been through it.
And it looks like I missed something on the global scale. So Sunny's also interested in like first world and third world UX communities and the gap in inequities in the space.
I can touch on that.
Okay, great.
With the online programming, it feels like that gap certainly exists, but it's closing because if you go into some active Slack communities with thousands, if not 10,000 plus members, you see people co-mingling from around the world. And now that events are online and mostly free or low cost, the accessibility has just jumped enormously. So I don't have a full answer on how to solve that challenge or address that problem, but I feel like digital communities are a huge step forward in that field.
Yeah, and just on that line, actually, we do have a question about us being an event-driven organization, how have we adapted or the community changed since COVID? And James, you've been pivotal in this. Did you want to start us off?
Absolutely. To start out, I would say the positives, the fact that as we saw in the chat here, there are folks from around the world joining. It's been so amazing to engage different audiences and different types of practitioners and different communities. And on the other end of that, we've been able to engage speakers from around the world. So from an organizer perspective, in a way, our lives have become a little bit easier because we're no longer worrying about a venue and getting sponsorship for food and beverage. Then the other side of that coin is we're all a little bit zoomed out and a little bit sick of staring at screens. And I'll guarantee you for almost any event, someone will ask, will there be a recording? And that's fully in their right. And we're actually recording right now. So to everyone watching on playback, hello, we love you too. But the flip side is you are competing with literally distractions everywhere in the home and on the screen. So in that sense, we've been very mindful of that, trying to make the events less long. And we've also been trying to engage a little more interactivity so that it doesn't feel like we're just talking at you the whole time.
Yeah, I was involved in, I think, the first remote event that you guys did also. And James and I were talking because, you know, they had their plan of events, but they were like in-person planned events. So we talked about, you know, what opportunity this presents in terms of like everybody right now has to figure out how to operate in a remote environment. So it's a great opportunity to do an event focused on that. We had talked about doing remote workshop style events when I was president, but because we were doing in-person events, it didn't really make sense. We would talk about doing things where people would be sitting back to back and like, you know, kind of faking a remote environment, but we never ended up going through with it. So it allowed us an opportunity to figure out like, what are the key things people need to learn, which helps us learn faster, I think, for operating in this new environment, and what would be a great value add for them, and then designing around that challenge. So it just presents a new challenge. And, you know, every time some challenge like that happens to like, you know, your entire community, it's just a huge opportunity.
Great, thanks for chiming in on that. The next question is from JB, and he wants to know, he or she, sorry, wants to know how important it is that there's a collaborative culture in San Diego to the success of SDXD. Paul, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental, and it's actually sort of our local our local personal culture, right? And I'll share a story, and this happened a number of times, right? People from other communities, like they're transplants from New York or the Bay Area or from Seattle. And, you know, the common refrain is that everybody is so cool here. Everybody is so open. And that is a distinct sort of San Diego vibe for UX communities that actually in other places where they have, you know, a lot of UX presence, it can tend to be a bit more sort of competitive, right? And here it is very much open, collaborative, everybody helping each other, everybody sharing. And so how important it is, it's foundationally important because it's sort of the essence of what makes us us and something that we're really proud of.
I would say that the like, so SDXD, like our focus is like at least 50% of our events will be workshop events. At least that's how I always understood it. And I think those workshop events where you're breaking out into groups and people are getting kind of a more intimate brainstorming kind of experience together, seeing how other people think and like being able to take that back to your job with you, especially if you don't have other people in those roles at your job and you're the only person doing it. It just kind of adds to that culture and creates that culture, creates great mentorship opportunities, creates, you know, more like, I don't know, like, you know, that kind of tribe, like community kind of feel, because you get to know people like in a different way when you're in those small groups and you have to work together really quickly. So I really think that, you know, workshops are a very important part of our community, and continuing the relationships that those create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another question about success. So how much of the success of SDXD do you think is attributed to luck, meeting the right people, having the right resources or access to venues, versus just hard work?
And I like that question. I can see it in the Q&A feed about how I built this. Taiki, I love that podcast too, by the way. And so I love that question. You guys might hear dogs barking. It's the age of COVID and we have stuff happening. So those are my dogs barking. You know, it's an interesting question. And I know like on how I built this, like everybody has this sort of standard pat answer. But I remember somebody, and I don't remember who it was, they said, well, you know, you make your own luck. And especially when you're building an organization like this, I firmly believe in that. And so it's hard work. It's just determination to make it happen, and it will happen. These kind of things, you can't wait and hope that you meet the right people, you know, and just kind of rely on that. You make your own luck, and it's through sheer determination. Now, you know, the luck aspect is, at least for me, I was really lucky to have this amazing group of leaders and volunteers to make it reality, right? Like, this is not something that one person can do on their own. But I really do believe that, like, it's hard work, and that's how it happens.
I think it's a lot more hard work technically. It's not particularly related to the luck of SDX or the success of SDXD, but I would say it fell down to kind of like luck that I ended up in the president role. Because when Paul stepped down, there was a board member that, like, we were all expecting would you know, jump into that role right away. I didn't feel like I was ready for it at all. But when nobody was, you know, raising their hand for it, I was like, do you think I could do it? You know, very nervous about it. But there was probably an aspect of luck to the success of the organization. The fact that when he announced it, it was at the planning meeting for that next year, and all these topics were already planned out. I was lucky that we already had somebody reach out to us with a ready talk for the first event. During that time where I didn't feel like I was necessarily like ready to be leading the group, but was jumping into the role anyways. So I think there's aspects of luck involved, but like, I think the 2.5 years that I was running it, it got better and better. And like, it was really just because of that dedication and all the board members who were doing so much heavy lifting to make sure we had these quality events. It was a lot of hard work. It always will be, especially if you're doing a lot of workshops.
Yeah, I'll echo those sentiments, and shout out Taiki, what's up? Thanks for the question as well. The hard work and that conscious effort goes such a long way, because we might all see different communities on Meetup that have a large membership or a large amount of past events. But if there isn't an organizing team putting in the time and effort, it's very easy for those communities, for lack of a better term, to kind of turn into these ghost towns where numbers wise still very large, but not too active. So that's why we make this very conscious effort to put in the hard work. And like Paul said, kind of create your own luck. And as Tara mentioned, that definitely plays into it as well. Like, some of the speakers we've had, I met purely by coincidence and serendipity at a conference, just during a coffee break or over lunch. So both play a factor, but I'd also weigh more on the effort.
Yeah, it sounds like there's definitely a little bit of both in there. The next question isn't related to how to build the community, but just more about UX in general. This is from JB. How do we convince an engineering-centric company of the value of spending money on UX design upfront? My company designs kiosks for public spaces, so both hardware and software UX are involved. Do you guys have suggestions or recommendations on this?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll start off and I'll give the pat answer, right? But it's a pat answer because it really does work. Is, you know, nothing convinces engineers that they really need to focus on UX more than watching people try to use their product and utterly failing, right? And so, you know, user research, usability testing, validation studies with actual people, really trying to get stuff done with your product, I think goes a huge way. There's a lot more support also just in the general business community of tying together UX with business success. Lots of articles out there. Everyone's seen the McKinsey study. You know, I forget what the name of that study is that shows like the market value of corporations that invest in design versus those that don't, and there's a huge gap there. And so I think those kind of resources you can share. And I do think that, like, you know, as opposed to sort of the quote bad old days where it was a really tough slog where UX was just not really that consider. I think it is in the general mindset of even in engineering communities that they understand that UX is important. And I think it's just one, show them with real people using your product, whether they can do it or not. And two, share a lot of those resources that are available, fantastic resources with, with very credible sources and names producing that information. I think those are the two strategies that I would recommend.
I could probably speak on this a little bit also. At my last job, each company is going to be very different, I think, in terms of like where they're at and what's the best, initial starting point for that transition, I think. My last job, I was working at a DoD contractor, and UX was pretty new there. They had UX titles, but they weren't doing the research or anything like that. So it wasn't really UX roles. So like a couple of us had joined around the same time. 2 people had HCI backgrounds, or at least cognitive science backgrounds. So we were doing a lot of like lunch hour presentations about what it is and why it's important. But with my team, I was focused a lot on the fact that like incorporating UX means you're going to have more consistency within your product, and therefore you'll have a lot more reusable pieces, which speaks very well to engineers. And then the fact that like how expensive it is to be trying to figure out designs during the engineering process, how expensive that is a very key point as well, and was something that really helped in my role there. But yeah, it's definitely a different challenge, I feel like, at every job you have, and there's a different kind of starting point for each of them. We baby stepped in with usability studies, and when the first one that like failed really hard, it's like, oh, hey, see, we need to do more discovery research. Can we start doing that now? So letting things fail is a good thing.
Yeah, I'll echo those. I believe the classic article was saying every dollar that you put into UX returns 2 to 100. So if nothing else, you can kind of hit them where it hurts monetary wise. I'd also like to call on a talk I saw last week at Enterprise Experience 20 by Shahrzad. She's a VP of design over at Salesforce. And one of the stories she talks about is each time she and her team had a seat at the table, they were so out to prove the value of UX and just shouting it. And while the team was getting results and producing great work, there was feedback from cross-functional partners that people are feeling a little threatened and uncomfortable. So she phrased it as fighting against an invisible enemy. So it's definitely important to advocate and evangelize for that. But at least personally, I feel like you don't want to be at the same time the person's like, oh my gosh, they're always preaching about this and they're telling us it's the only way. So also understanding your role, owning it, making an impact in it.
Mm-hmm. One more thing I might add too, when we were doing the member highlight roles and had people interviewing, different members about their job and what they do, one of the members answered about like how they were having a hard time getting research added into the process. So they would do like ad hoc outside of work, quick recorded low effort usability studies so that they could bring it back to the VP to show them like, this is what we learned and this is what we should change. And that was enough to get them buy-in. So like, of course, depending on if that makes sense, it would have been really hard for me at a DoD contractor to potentially find the right people, but there are ways of doing it without going through the proper channels. But if you work at a consumer company or that makes consumer grade products that anybody uses, it's easier to find those people that you could put in front of something really quickly in order to get that footage you need at work.
Awesome. Something that James said actually sparks just something that I'll tack on, or 2 very kind of tactical things maybe that you can do with engineers, especially. So one is, ask them, because everybody is aware of this if you're an engineer. You build all kinds of amazing features, but then it gets put behind a clunky front end or a clunky interface, and it just fails. And so, the idea is, hey, look, you built all this amazing stuff, but do you really want it to be hidden behind this clunky thing that doesn't show how to get there, how to get all the value out of it, right? Like, do yourself a favor and make this really easy and delightful, and all the amazing work that you've done will shine. So that's one way. The other thing is, engineers, this is overly broad, but probably safe statement. They love to solve problems, right? That's their thing. That's what they love to do. And so if there's any way that you can kind of spin the issue, which is how can you solve the problem of making this easier for people to use? And that little mental shift will often get them really engaged. Like, oh, okay, well, we can figure this out. We can make this faster. We can get rid of like 3 steps here. And so those are 2 things that I'll just tack on.
Love all of those tips. Those are great, especially when working with engineering partners specifically. So we're approaching our time. So I just wanted to say this is going to be the last question for today. And what I want to leave you guys with is, what do you wish that you knew as an event organizer starting out? James, do you want to start? Since you're the newest.
Closing with the stumper. Here we go.
Yes. I'll say that I'm extremely fortunate to have come in after the organization has had a lot of events under its belt, and it's Paul and it's Tara and it's a lot of other folks who we recognize on the video, and to everyone who's come to the event. So we've just learned so much. So I say I'm in that fortunate position, and my cop-out answer is watch the video and check out our playbook, and you'll see everything you need to know to run an amazing event. But for a real answer, I would just say it takes a village. And I think a lot of folks who get into event organization and community building might be kind of type A's and really wanting to see things through and executing things. But as you can imagine, there's just so many moving parts. So the advice that I feel like I've always known, but I wish I kind of took to heart sooner, was just really leaning on my teammates like you and our other fabulous board members to help make sure that everything goes smoothly and not putting all the pressure on oneself.
I think it's more something I wish I would have done sooner. And I think it's just like, I guess I wish I would have realized the value of those like different one-on-one conversations through different channels. Because, any team is going to have different personalities on it who maybe feel more comfortable, maybe not as comfortable speaking out in front of the group, or maybe feel more comfortable like taking the time to kind of think about something and writing it in the email as opposed to in a one-on-one conversation, versus like the people who like to brainstorm one-on-one. So I wish I would have, at the very beginning, reached out to every single board member one-on-one to get their perspectives on all these different things and their ideas for things that maybe they thought could be improved, what might not be working right now, or what they think could be added. Because I waited a few months into my presidency before I did that. And we got some really great responses from people who weren't necessarily bringing it up in the group format or in our Slack channel. So that would probably be my learning point. That I think Paul's ready. Yeah.
Well, all right. Everybody get ready to collectively groan and roll your eyes at how saccharine this answer is. But I wish I knew how great this was going to be. Because, at the time when your head's down and you're like just trying to get stuff, get the group going and get these events on, and get all the pieces in place, and then plan ahead. There's a lot, right? And the trials and travails of your work life and all that stuff, and how much it's worth it, because it's such a satisfying experience. I mean, this has been a great sort of experience for me personally, recording that talk and then talking about this stuff and just kind of reminiscing with James and Tara, the sort of arc of this organization. I'm super proud of it and what it's grown into. And so, my saccharine answer is, I wish I had known how great it would be, because it would have kept, through sheer determination and willpower made it happen, right? But there were some low points where you're just like, man, is this worth it? This is tough. And so, I wish I could go back in time and just, tap myself on the shoulder and going this is gonna be awesome. This is well worth it. So that's what I wish I knew.
Great. Thank you so much for answering all these questions and sharing your perspectives. And also thank you for everybody who submitted questions and for being here with us today. I have just one more thing that I want to share with you guys, which is, hopefully you'll be able to see soon, technology issues. Let's see.
Wouldn't be a Zoom without anything like this, right? Without something like this happening.
Okay, well, hopefully you're able to see the screen, but we really feel that it's important to thank everybody. So while we have, you know, James, Tara, and Paul and myself on right now, there have been so many people who have contributed to the group throughout the years. So thank you to past board members, volunteers, attendees, members, everybody. Everybody who came before that might not be mentioned on this slide. We'd also want to give a special shout out to Sergio, Kennedy, and Betty who helped with this specific presentation. And lastly, we want to invite you all to our upcoming SDXD events, and to join, you can reach out to us anytime. We have all of our events posted on Meetup. We also have additional information on our website, sdxd.org, and you can say hi or send us any comments or follow-up thoughts that you have to sdxd.org@gmail.com. Special shout out to our upcoming event, September 23rd with Paige Bennett, who's going to be talking to us about how to share research insights. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that. Thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate you being here with us today.